This is our snowflake design. You can see that we have a one stroke with the blue variation and a stencil of a snowflake right here in the corner of the eye. And this is how that goes on. We're going to get our brush wet. We're going to put the blue one stroke down first using a 1/2 inch flat, or excuse me, a 3/4 inch flat brush. And you're going to load it by running your brush across the top of the cake one direction and then flip over and do the other one. Make sure that your colors don't move around too much on here, otherwise it's going to get too muddy. The white is already starting to pull in some of the blue. I really do try to keep that white, but sometimes it's almost unavoidable. Okay, once you've got a good load, you're going to start above this child's eyebrow, and you're going to touch to her face, pull down, swoop around, and your corner of the eye right here is your focal point. So if you've got some gaps in here, go back over it again, and then give it another swoop and a swoop, and then just one underneath her eye, like that. While that dries, you're going to give it a little spritz of your iridescent white glitter. This is clear, so you can see the color through. And you can load your finger dauber sponge for your snowflake. This is a finger dauber, and I'm using a white paint, and I've gotten my sponge somewhat wet but pretty dry. And then I'm going to kind of run it over the cake of paint. It should pull pretty hard. You don't want it to slide across too easy, otherwise it's too wet. So it's got some grab to it. It's pretty sticky. Okay, this is my stencil. Depending on the size of the face will determine which snowflake I use for this design. A smaller face, obviously you're going to use one of the smaller stencils, or one of the smaller snowflakes. Larger face, you can go with a larger snowflake. But this one is pretty small, so I'm going to go with the snowflake right here in the corner of her eye. And you're just going to kind of bounce your white into the stencil, and then lift off, and there you have your snowflake. Sometimes it's perfect and sometimes it's not quite perfect. It just depends on the humidity and whether or not your sponge is wet enough or too wet. It is better to be not wet enough than too wet, because not wet enough means you've got an obvious snowflake. It's just a little faint on some of the edges. But if it's too wet, it's going to be a blob of white that you will not be able to see as a snowflake. Will just look like a big old blob of white. So dry is better than wet.